Welcome everyone to Rebel Impact for another video where we talk tactically about Star Wars Destiny. I'm your host, Rebel Gray, and today we're going to talk about some hidden gems in the Legacies set. Now I know the set has been out for some time, but with it also came a new format, which is trilogies, right? And of course draft and sealed and all that other stuff. And a lot of these cards have actually been shining quite a bit more in those formats, but for standard format, they do have some applications that could be quite good too. So as a disclaimer, I'll say that this is probably not an exhaustive list of cards that people might consider hidden gems, but I'd like to think that I've seen each of these cards shine in a particular way in constructed formats, and there's definitely some potential for a few of these in draft and sealed as well, and I'm going to talk about that as we go through each one. Also, before you stop berating me in the comments, the term hidden is going to be interpreted differently by different people, right? So to some, it's obvious that this card was good from the start. To some, this may be kind of eye-opening, yet others still going to want to debate the cards being good or not. Hey, listen, I like all of you, maybe most of you equally, and I hope that everybody gets a little something out of this one, no matter what your opinion is on the term hidden gems itself. So I kind of want this to be a shorter form video, so let's just get right to it, shall we? So let's start off with a few dice cards that may not be catching your eye right away. And the first up is the ETA-2 Interceptor. Now, it may not look like much at first, but this card actually has a high potential in the right deck, of course. The ship's die may also not look like much for the resources, but you can't measure it solely on that. And realistically, when people are talking about the die in this card, I don't think it's that bad. So its action is actually what bumps its cost up, and it reads, remove this die or one of your dice showing a shield to exhaust a support. So against vehicle decks, this can be a pretty good action, and I think the format it can shine the most in is actually a trilogy's draft itself, but for standard, I actually think you can use this as a really neat control piece in a blue hero deck. Of course, you're giving up a die to save damage, and it's really only good against other vehicle decks, but at this time in the meta, with vehicle decks running around, I feel like it's got the potential to do a decent amount of work for you in a game. Runaway Boomas is another die card that probably should be getting more attention than it does, and I know that it's another expensive one, and yet the power action seems pretty darn good in the right deck. A repeatable die that does 2 or 3 indirect damage and has a great power action to be able to do that again is pretty good, and you could resolve 4, 5, maybe even 6 indirect damage per turn for 1 resource after its initial cost. So in a deck with some focus die, you could get a lot out of this card. And while I'll admit that it's probably only considered borderline good in standard, it once again shines in a limited format. So the last one here on my list is for dice cards is the Republic Cruiser. And I know what you're saying, it's a vehicle with no damage sides, so you're like, why am I going to bother? However, it's a perfect support vehicle. It's got a focus side, it's got 2 1-resource sides, and it's got 2 special sides. And it's only 2 resources to play, so it's cheap. You can play it on round 1 if you really wanted to. And the special lets you give a unique character 2 shields or give each of your unique characters 1 shield, right? So in some of these 3-wide decks that are running a lot of unique characters, you're looking at 33% chance to generate 3 shields, or you can give 2 shields to one of those characters. So I think above all the hidden gems in this section, this one's kind of money for me, and it gets overshadowed big time, and that may be because there are some other vehicles and vehicle decks that are perhaps just better than it. Vehicle decks, they generally go for a dice flood in terms of damage. They don't think too much about sustain, but in a mill deck, this could actually be a decent card to just generate 3 shields around, or two shields for 1 character around. So I feel like when the Awakenings block cycles out of standard, this will likely move up the ranks significantly in terms of both playability and even positive mention. But you can get ahead of the curve right now and start putting it in your decks and seeing if you like it. Moving right along now, let's take a look at 2 blue commons that I think are worth mentioning. And the first is Frighten. And this really is an amazing card, and it is noticeably better in practice than Intimidate, which for 0 lets you remove all shields from 1 character. On the other hand, Frighten lets you remove a total of up to 3 shields from any number of characters for 1 resource, and it has ambush. So what's better than removing your opponent's shields and then dealing 5 damage to them for 1 resource, right? Probably not a whole lot. But you can look at this card as essentially doing a converted 3 damage, right? 1 for each shield remove. Plus, it enables the power action for Maul's lightsaber potentially. And that is a card which at this point in time really needs no introduction after that regional season that we've been going through here in early 2018. So play this card in your villain decks because it is really quite good. Alter is the other card that I wanted to mention. This is a blue neutral card, and for 2 resources we can flip 2 dice in any pool to the sides that we want them to be on. So this is pretty good. It's kind of like 2 use the forces in 1, and it doesn't have a spot requirement. It is a bit more expensive than we might like, but in this case we get what we pay for, and that's actually a pretty good thing. So setting up big damage or end around plays with Alter can shift the focus of your game in your favor. So I know that I've said it before and I'll reiterate, but anytime in Destiny where you can do 2 things at once for a reasonable cost, it's usually worth taking a look at the card, ability, or action that's actually enabling that. And both of the cards in this section that we just talked about do just that. And that's why I believe they're considered real gems. Alright, we're going to talk about 4 yellow cards now that I feel are also great commons worth putting in your decks when it makes sense. And the first 2 are also cards that let you do 2 things for the price of 1, and the price in both cases is actually 0. So the first card we're going to talk about here is Take Flight. I absolutely love this card in a Boba deck or any deck that runs a good amount of yellow dice. Heck, it even has a spot in Villain Mill when you think about it. You know, take some garbage dice, re-roll them, resolve some dice. If they roll damage, cool, resolve that. If they roll discards or focus, great, you can resolve those. Or you can play another card with ambush like Bait and Switch, or another Take Flight, or a gun in a different character and roll them in. There's really this unbelievable amount of stuff that you can do off of re-rolling and having an ambush. And but any card that lets you do a re-roll and an ambush is super nice because I feel like it's a sneaky play that can have a huge impact on your game in basically any round from 1 all the way to 3, 4, or 5. Similarly, Impulsive is letting you resolve a die you already like and taking another action right afterwards. So there are some very interesting interactions with something like Kanan Jarrus here, but also in decks with just mixed damage, right? So Impulsive is not really run in many high-level decks right now, but as we see the game move towards a hardier mix of melee or range damage with indirect damage sort of peppered throughout their deck, this could be a way to look at speeding up your turns in those decks if you care about speed. So what I'm saying is, don't count it out yet. It's actually a fairly good card, despite it having a very simple text. And I feel like people don't quite understand the power of being able to just use a card to resolve your die and also having ambush. And I guess just, you can even mention that it gets around things like running interference in that case. The third yellow card I want to highlight for you all is Scruffy Looking Nerf Herder. I've actually been running this card in a couple of decks since Legacies dropped, and it has done work for me. And it has become only more relevant with the present shaping standard meta revolving around vehicle decks and combo decks. Scruffy lets you target something you want out of an opponent's hand. And you know that in those heavy vehicle decks, calling support is going to take something out of their hand, right? And in those combo decks where you may want to call, an opponent is holding onto an upgrade in an event that they're waiting to use, call that instead. And you're going to be bound to hit something from the hand that is really critical to their deck. So this card's applications do go well beyond mill and discard decks. It can actually find a home in an aggro deck just as easily. And mid-range decks probably love this card too. And anyone trying to construct a control deck now is probably going to want to include it as well, although that seems like an uphill battle at the moment in Destiny. I really love this card, and I feel like more people should too. The fourth card and last one in the batch here is Dangerous Maneuver. It's really the epitome of nothing too fancy, and you're going to heal 2 damage from one of your characters and deal 2 indirect damage to yourself. So with shields in play, this card can be a real savior. Unblockable damage also is still a thing, remember. But past that, it can also allow you to use another character's shields to heal a dying one, which can be so clutch in a game. So I have seen this card personally do work in Standard a little bit, and in Trilogies, and also in Draft, where it actually seems to shine to me the most. This is a very neat card, and it has a lot of applications. And the trade-off idea here is like so blue color deck to me, but to see it in yellow and to see it as neutral, I think that's really, really interesting. And it's a solid addition in the right deck right now. For all you lovers of red cards, we're going to talk about reds now. And the first one we're going to talk about is Scorched Earth. And my biggest complaint about this card is that it does not get enough love. It is a 2-cost villain event that, while you control the battlefield, says to deal indirect damage to an opponent equal to the number of dice in their pool. Now, I don't know how well you personally follow the trending meta, but Dice Flood has become a real thing in this meta. Those Seven Sister decks, those vehicle decks, heck, even those blue hero decks, they're putting a lot of dice onto the board. And played at just the right moment, this card can devastate your opponent for 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe even more damage, basically out of nowhere. This is a card that has the potential to let you turn a corner in the game. And right now, I find this card very, very relevant for what I said before. And I really have never seen anyone do less than 5 damage with it. I've also never seen anyone hold on to this card for more than a round in their hand, because that quote-unquote right time to play it happens pretty frequently. This is a great card right here. Don't pass it up in this meta, because you might just be leaving damage on the table. Next up is perhaps a less insane card, but it is no less interesting, and it's Suppression Field. And it's one of the few supports that lets us remove damage from the table through a card action. The caveat, of course, is that once this one accumulates 3 damage on it, it is discarded from play. But you can keep this thing on the table for a while with a character like Rose. And there's a possibility, though, that you also could just nix a big damage die off the table at an important moment, and you're going to lose it right away. But in the normal circumstances, you should expect to use it twice at the very least. Maybe the first time you use it, you grab a 2 damage die, and the next time is whatever else, or maybe a 1 and then like a 3 or something like that. So you need that after excuse me, you need after that, assuming you're not running Mend in your deck, that it's only going to last about 2 actions or so. And I like this card in mill decks and stuff like that. I think it's a solid control option for red. It's a lot like Honor Guard, which is also in this Trilogies format. But if you already slow play, and you want some good die control options, you might want to be checking this out for your deck. It may be a really appropriate fit for you. The third card that we're going to talk about here is Sudden Impact. And I felt the need to talk about this one basically because I don't see anyone using it, and I feel like that is a real shame. So since the days of Pomaz, we've known that spread damage is dangerous and scary. And this card lets you cannibalize one of your die showing damage to deal damage to each opponent's characters equal to half the value rounded up. So what it's saying is if you remove a 1 damage die, it does 1 damage to all an opponent's characters. The same for a 2 damage die. But for a 3 damage die, which is half 1.5, rounds up to 2, that's 2 damage to all. And that's kind of what I find the most intriguing. 3 wide decks are becoming the norm right now. It's very hard to find a solid 2-character deck that is going to sort of be the end-all be-all, okay? So if you turn a 3 damage die into 6 damage in a 3 wide for just 1 resource, to me that is insanely good on paper. And one of the interactions I actually like a lot with this card is using it on the 6 indirect damage side on the resistance bomber. Resolving that die normally would cost you 2 resources and 6 damage that you don't get to choose where it goes. It also would put a damage on the bomber itself, which is bad because the bomber is on a ticking clock, right? Once it hits that 3rd damage on it, it blows up. Sudden Impact, on the other hand, doesn't resolve its die. It removes the die, and it only costs 1 resource, and it does 3 damage to each of an opponent's characters. So that 6 indirect for 2 essentially becomes potentially 9 damage against a 3 wide or 12 damage against a 4 wide deck for only 1 resource, and it doesn't put a tick on the bomber. Are you still not convinced? Well, then I don't know what else I could say about it, because I felt like that was probably the best example that I had. Last up for the vid here is Cover Team, and I wanted to put this one last because I feel like the potential of this card is literally untapped, and this is why. If you can get this thing out early in the game, maybe round 1, round 2, something like that, then what you're paying for in decks that have a lot of indirect damage is one resource now to say that you're going to do +1 damage each round for the rest of the game, assuming you can always resolve an indirect damage die. So vehicle decks that can find a spot for this may want to consider it. And in Trilogy's format, I think that this card's kind of in no matter what, just because of limited card pool. I'm not 100% sure on that, because it's not an archetype that I'm like familiar with firsthand. I don't play vehicle decks, but I do think about how much potential it has. In a 4 or 5 round game, that's 4 to 5 extra damage that you're doing. And you got to ask yourself, would you pay one resource for that? I think I would. So why aren't you? So this is supposed to be one of those short form videos that I was talking about at the beginning of the year, but it's possible that this one ran a little bit longer than I anticipated. My initial plan was actually to spread out the different colors that I went over into different videos over time since Legacies dropped, but then I got backed up in real life with this class I'm taking and work and other stuff, so I kind of shoved it all into one video. Because I figured, if I can't release them all sort of within a short span of time, then it's not worth it. And I didn't want to be like, oh, I'm going to really have a whole month where I just talk about hidden gems. That to me is like really silly. So I had actually started on this script so long ago that I had easy pickings and into the garbage chute on this list. But now that the meta is, settling somewhat, I had to remove them because we no longer consider those hidden gems, right? People pretty much know about those cards. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that this one was really, really late in coming to you. But I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily. We just got the announcement for Way of the Force, and it's not hitting stores till Q3. So we're going to be in this meta for a while. So this video will hopefully be relevant for a while as well. In channel news, this Tuesday, I will be shooting that collaborative video that I've been talking about for like 2 weeks now, with another content creator who is much more famous than I will ever be. So you can look forward to that hitting the YouTubes either very late Tuesday night or maybe Wednesday early morning afternoon, depending on when I finish editing it. I'm really psyched about it. So much so that the outline that me and the other person have put together for the script has become really overwhelming. There's a whole lot of information in it. And we're going to be talking about a very universal topic to CCGs. And I'm optimistic that we're going to be able to do it justice for the Destiny community, assuming we don't go on too many tangents. Also, if you haven't checked it out yet, I was on episodes 7 and 8 of Jackalmen Games, doing what they call a cantina, where we just played some Destiny. You should go and watch that. I play a mill deck, and I play Boba Phasma as well. So, and if you want the deck list for those, feel free to ask me. I'll also put the links to those videos actually in the show notes for this. So beyond this video will be that one on Tuesday. And since I have this entire week off from work, I'll be working on a third video for you all as well, just to keep you interested. I would really like the channel to get up to 400, maybe even 500 subscribers before the summer. So I am going to be trying to be pumping out some worthwhile content for you as much as I can and get it spread out all over that social media stuff. As much as I hate Twitter, I will try to use it a little bit more. All right. So with all that said, I want to thank you guys for stopping by. Stay tuned to the channel, as I said, for all the stuff happening this week. It'll be super exciting. I promise you that. All right, folks. Remember also to dust your PCs regularly and always check to make sure there aren't any Minox chewing on the power couplings. Until next time, may the Force be with you.